guys so much. If y'all would please, bow your head, let's pray a moment. Dear Lord, thank you so much for letting us live in a community where we can assemble, discuss our issues, learn about our issues, be intelligent, make right decisions for the safety and the concern of our community, not just for the days moving forward, but for the years moving forward and the centuries moving forward. We're so blessed to live in a land that gives us opportunity. May everybody have safe travels to the return home. Thank you so much for being here safely. Thank you, Lord. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Good. All right. The CEP, the purpose of this meeting tonight is that we're here to educate. And so what we're going to learn tonight, there's some real changes coming up in the nuclear business from WCS in our community. And we've asked the TECQ to come tonight to help answer these questions. So there are questions to help answer any questions or alleviate any concerns that we might have. So I don't know, it's really that simple. And here's the ground rules. When we do get some question and answer session, I expect everybody to be professional and act like an adult and adults. We're just not going to have an orderly meeting. We've had instances where we've not had.
Yeah, we're good.
We've had some instances where we've had some trouble. We just want a good education meeting. That's what we're going to do. We're not going to tolerate anything that's unprofessional. So when we get into our section of discussion, we're going to have a good meeting. This is here to inform and educate, and we're just not going to let it be at the bottom. So I appreciate that. And without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Dave Carlson. He's the president of WCF. And he's here. He's going to talk to you about what we've got going on out there. So thank you, Dave.
Thanks, Bob. So what I'd like to do, since there's quite a few people online, I'm not sure what the count is yet, but we expect quite a few people online, is we're going to do a brief overview of the site so that people that are familiar with the site can have a little bit of information about it. And so that's what I'd like to start with. As soon as we can get it up here. So let me start with a little bit of background on me. I'm the president of WCS. I've been president here for 7 years now. 40 years in the nuclear industry, was in the nuclear Navy. That's where I got my training. And really been around this kind of stuff for a long time. And I'm just excited and pleased to have the opportunity to speak to you tonight. So if we go to the first slide here. Let me talk about what we do. So the main thing that we do on the site is we do safe disposal of low-level radioactive waste. We have, I'll show you some details of it, we have the most modern and state-of-the-art facility that exists in the world. It's one of only 4 facilities in the US, and 2 of those facilities are several decades old and only serve a few states. So there's really just 2 in the US. We provide essential services that are necessary for nuclear power plants, for hospitals, research laboratories, oil and gas, industrial customers, and for the US government as well. And a couple things you see there is you see waste coming into our sites in casks, which are on the right-hand side there, and also off a rail, and containers coming off a rail. Next slide, please. Let me talk about where we're at, because some people may not be familiar. I know it's a bit of a trip to get out there. As we go through this slide, I'd like to say we do invite anybody to come out for a tour. We appreciate the opportunity to get tours with folks so they can see what our facility looks like and see how we do business out there. So when I look at the direct distances to the local communities, the closest community we have to the site is Eunice. Eunice is about 5 miles to the west of us. In terms of a bigger community, Hobbs is 15 miles away, so fairly close. Jal, not quite as big, but they're 24 miles away. And then we've got Andrews and Seminole that are out at the 30-mile point, and then everything else is a bit more distant. Obviously, those distances would be more if you had to go by road. Our nearest residence is 3.5 miles to the east. That's in New Mexico. I believe our nearest Texas resident is about 7 miles from our facilities. In terms of businesses, we are right next door to Urenco. That's a uranium enrichment facility on the New Mexico side of the border. We're right across the street from the Lee County landfill. And next to DB Materials, which is a concrete plant, and Sundance, which is an oil and gas waste facility. Next slide, please. So this is an overview of the site. This is just part of the site. So our active area in there, and really that's defined by what's inside that red loop. Our active area is about 1,400 acres. We have 14,000 acres out there. Just a couple of key points on here. There's a line towards the left-hand side of the screen going north and south. That's actually the Texas-New Mexico border. So part of our property is in New Mexico, part is in Texas. All of our operations are in Texas. We have 4 landfills on site, as well as treatment facilities and the rail access that you see. The primary landfills that I'll talk about, because they're the most active ones relative to all this, are the federal waste facility that's kind of right in the middle there, the compact waste facility, and the hazardous waste landfill. So one thing that looks really odd about this picture when you look at it is those facilities are lined up on a diagonal. You might say to yourself, why would they do that? You know, you might as well just go straight east and west. Well, the answer to the question is because that's where the Red Bed Ridge is. So when we initially came to this community, what folks were told, and the reason why this site was selected was because there's an outcrop of red bed at that point. It's a layer about 600 feet thick that I'll show you on the next slide, and it runs on the diagonal. So the facilities are set up to run diagonal along with that red bed. Next slide, please. So if you haven't been out there, this is a little bit about the design. So I mentioned we've got 600 feet of red bed, and that's not the red bed you're used to in your backyard. That's continuous red bed, and if you come in the office sometime, we've got samples of it, but it's basically like rock. It is, I'd say, impermeable, but the permeability of it is about 1 foot per 1,000 years, so it's extremely impermeable. Some of the attributes of our site that are different than other sites, we're subgrade. Because we don't have to worry about groundwater out there because we really don't have groundwater. We're able to build the facility subgrade down to about 120 feet deep for the deepest parts of the facility. That means that all the waste that's placed is at least 30 feet under the surface in those facilities. So that's something that's unheard of in this industry and something that provides a high level of protection for the future. So our performance assessment looks at things like geology, surface water, groundwater, future weather, and it looks even into what residential conditions going to look like 1,000 years from now, 10,000 years from now, after people have forgotten the facility was ever there. And so the evaluation is done. What if somebody moved on top of this landfill at some point in the future, built a garden out there, drilled a well out there? What would happen? And so those are the criteria that we have to pass in our performance assessment to make sure that we don't exceed those limits to that future resident that, we can only make the guess that that could happen after we in Texas lose control of where the site was ever located. So just in closing on this slide, this is the newest and most robust low-level radioactive waste facility in the U.S., but really in the world as well. Next slide, please. So this is a view of our compact waste facility, one of the 3 facilities I talked about. So this is regulated by TCEQ, as is the entire site. In fact, we have 2 on-site inspectors out there, so their job location is on the site, to be on the site with us, although they have a separate office, of course. This was privately developed and privately operated, and it opened in 2012. It's owned by the state of Texas, so the land under this facility is actually owned by the state of Texas. It's not owned by WCS. If you look at the picture there, what you see is disposal in these modular concrete containers. So what is that? That's a container with about a 12-inch wall thickness or so. It's about 1 foot thick. And that's what the waste is placed into. So we take waste out of a cask, the way that it comes to us in the site. There's a metal liner that the waste is contained in. We lift that metal liner and put it into the modular concrete container, and then those modular concrete containers are placed underground in our cell. Again, between 100 and 30 feet deep is the shallowest that any of that might be. So an interesting point on that is that when we look at a performance assessment for the site, we don't take account for that concrete. We assume the concrete goes away eventually. We assume that metal goes away eventually. So everything is assumed to be just, basically left in the facility after all that goes away. Interestingly, the truth of that is that most everything we take into the facility decays away. It's gone before we would ever get to the end of life of concrete or metal that's in there. Next slide, please. This is our federal waste facility. It's also regulated by TCEQ. Nothing goes into there without TCEQ granting us a license to do so. It was also privately developed and operated and opened after the compact waste facility, so it opened in 2013. With this facility, because federal waste is going into it, the federal government takes ownership of it post-closure. So this is not a Texas responsibility, but post-closure, this would be a federal government facility just like Pantex or just like any other federal government facility once it's closed. Again, you see the same kind of modular concrete containers there, although there's also square shapes in this facility as well, same thing. Next slide. This is another picture of transportation casks. We own transportation casks that are used to bring radioactive materials to the site. We have the most modern and state-of-the-art casks in service. These casks are designed to provide protection to the public and to the environment in the event of the most severe accidents. In fact, there's never been a release from one of these casks in 70 years of operation, and it's not because there was an accident 70 years ago, it's because that's how long they've been in operation. Those are regulated by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and by the Department of Transportation, depending on what type of cask it is. Next slide. So I think most folks know, but our staff is here. We're the largest private employer in Andrews County. On site today, we have about 120 people, and we're always looking for more, about 15 million in payroll. Employees are in the community here, and we try to engage. Our goal is to have more communication, not less communication. Our office is in town. We have staff in that office every day. Tours and education events are available. In fact, if you have a safety meeting or something at your company, if you'd like to have us come in for 5 minutes or 15 minutes and talk about what we do on the site, we'd absolutely be glad to do that, take questions, whatever it might be. We provide high school courses and then following courses if folks pass the course, internships on the site. If they have a successful internship, we offer jobs to folks that go through the intern program. And we have outreach to other regional communities as well. We do provide financial contributions, as any good business should. The Education Foundation was actually something we started with WCS money, but there's more that we contribute to. The site itself, we've invested over $300 million, and we purchase our supplies and services from local companies every time that we possibly can. There are special surcharges on the site. 5% of our low-level radioactive waste disposal revenue, both from the compact waste facility and from the federal waste facility, goes to Andrews County. And that's something that we were central to when that first got put into legislation. There was a point where there was a desire by the state to take all the money to the state. Didn't make sense to us, didn't make sense to the local community, and so we were able to push to make sure that happened. And that's been $17.8 million to Andrews so far, paid in addition to all our normal property taxes and other fees that we pay. And it's used for quality of life, community improvements. So next slide. Maybe the most important slide, like I said, we want to communicate. There's a picture of our office. It's right behind the courthouse on Northwest 1st Street. Our phone number is available there. We've got a website. We engage in social media as well. You can email us at our email. One thing I do want to tell you is everything we do has our name on it. We are never anonymous. We don't engage in Facebook battles, anything like that. We put our name on it. So frankly, if it's critical of someone or something, that didn't come from us. If it's critical of, for example, oil and gas, you know that's a lifeblood in this community. That didn't come from us. If it's critical of people, that didn't come from us. So please keep that in mind as you look at things on social media. There's actually been a bit of a campaign to put information out that seemed to come from us. It doesn't. So just look for our name on it. And with that, I'm glad to take questions from panel members if you want to do that now, or anything you'd love to do next.
Thank you, Dave, I appreciate it. And what we typically do, we have a panel. And I'd like to, panel members that are here, would you please stand? I appreciate it. Adrian Gonzalez, Jerry, Laura, I believe, come with glasses on. All right. And Seth, all right?
Great.
Greg, I'm sorry, Greg.
It's all right.
All right. And Ken King's office declined, and Kevin Park's office said he couldn't have somebody here. Is Paul here, Parker
Yep.
Larson?
That would be me.
Parker?
That's me.
I butchered your last name.
That's
Sorry
okay.
about that. All right. And then let's see, we have Alicia Sanchez, Dave Carlson, and we have, they're non-voting members, the way this thing works. We have the community panel members, which are not, Alicia, they were non-voting members, Laura's a non-voting member. And we have the task of deciding what we think the next topic's going to be, what's important for this group, what type of education we want to get out. And we do have to get together after this meeting this evening. We've got a couple of members that have resigned. We have to replace several members. So we've got some homework to do with this and over with. But it's a really simple task and with a huge, huge responsibility. So if any of you guys have any questions, we open it up to these panel members first, and then we will take it to the public. But I want to get to the TECQ part before we do that. So if y'all have any questions, if panel members have questions, there's a microphone right here. So, everybody good? Y'all would make this easy on me. Thank you. I appreciate it. And if we're going to do that, we're going to roll right into the TECQ part. I think Chance Good was going to start us off today. We appreciate it. Thank you for President Austin for being here. Thank you, Chance.
Thank you, Bob. Glad to be here. Just so everybody knows who I am, I'm Chance Gooden. I'm the section manager for the radioactive materials section at the TCEQ. I have a staff person here to help me field some questions because he's more in the details of what we look at our agency. Dr. Hans Wieger is here. And then my boss, Ashley Forbes, Deputy Director of the division, came here to make sure we do our job correctly. Before I begin, we also have our commissioner here, Bobby Janeka, but I wanted to ask him to step out because I'll be talking about some things that are pending and maybe come before him at our commission agenda, so it'll be brief. I know the majority of the reason that you're here, we want to have the open discussion on GTCC, greater than Class C, and that is why we brought our commissioner here to talk about that. In light of our recent actions that we've had, we'll just to kind of discuss some of those things that have been ongoing in the program before we bring them back in to talk about what the NRC is doing with regards to GTCC. So, next slide. I won't spend much time on this next slide since Mr. Carlson kind of gave an overview of the facility. I wasn't sure what that would look like, but he did a much better job of what the facility is today and how it's operated, so we can move past this slide. And then this slide is basically what the picture here is of the compact facility. They recently have went through phase 2 of that facility to build out that cell Now, this was something that was added to the license in an amendment back in 2014, and they are just now getting that completed. That's how long it took to get that build out complete. The understanding it was done in December, so we're just waiting on a report from them from that completion. So that's a picture of that. Next slide. This is the one that we've recently been working on. This is Amendment 40. This has to deal with the incident of the transuranic waste that was from the Los Alamos National Laboratory that was scheduled to be disposed at the WIP. However, it was diverted to the Federal Waste Facility at WCS for temporary storage. We have reviewed that, and currently that red arrow that you see there is where that is in the Federal Waste Facility. And that is been issued. And I think that right now there's a period of a motion to overturn that decision. And one of the reasons he has to step out. But anyway, the purpose of this was to be able to move this waste to a staging area, which would be in the on-site storage facility to prepare that waste to be shipped for transportation. And we believe it's probably going to be shipped to the WIP. And there's no reason why we wouldn't believe it would be going to the WIP. There was a number of other things that were associated with that, and we can discuss any one of those, but I know that was the majority of the reason that amendment was done. That they increased financial assurance for the compact facility. They updated an environmental monitoring program. They did some upgrading to the stabilization building, fireproofing and such. They also incorporated some updates to the radiological impact analysis. And the next slide. And lastly, we are in the thick of renewal. So initially this license was for 15 years, and that 15 years is up. They submitted in time of renewal. We got that in August of 2023, and we're in administrative review. We're at the end of that. We're preparing notice for that, so you should see a notice coming out very soon of us being administrative complete. That's not over. We have a long road ahead of us to review it for technical completeness. And one thing to note about the renewal, there's no amendments associated with the renewal. It's strictly just updating anything that has been changed for that facility over the 15 years and putting it all back into the license again. So they've done a number of different things throughout the 15 years, and that is basically a re-review to make sure everything has been updated and put into one license. When we're done with that, that authorizes that facility for another 10 years. And the next slide is my questions slide. We can table the questions, or we can ask some questions. If I can't answer them, I might have to defer to Dr. Rieger on some of the points, or we can save them. Let me just put it this way. If we have questions that are about a pending matter that I just talked about, I'd have to take those questions now, because once Commissioner Janeka steps back in, I won't be able to answer those. So if it's something pending that we have going on that you want me to answer, now's the time to ask those questions. But if you want to go ahead and start talking about the bigger, broader discussion about what NRC is doing with greater than Class C, we can bring him back in, because he's the all-knowing on that. Yes, ma'am.
May I ask a question regarding the request?
Excuse me, Jewel, what would you please come get this microphone, please? Right here, please, so we can all hear you, please. Thank you.
Hi. Yes, sir. Hi, my name is Monica Perales. Hi. I have a question regarding the WIP waste.
Just stand right here so that they can see you online.
Okay. Yes, ma'am. Right here? Okay. I have a question regarding the WIP waste. How much money is paid to WCS annually since the start, and how much of that goes to Andrews?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I'd have to get back to you.
That's federal.
And
It's at the federal government.
okay, right, but the license for that is governed by you all. Okay, so you have no idea how much money is generated when you issue that license?
I'd have to look that up. I think if we add that information, we have to go. I don't have it offhand. Is that something we would get?
And if anything were to go wrong with the whip waste, who would provide emergency services?
That's it.
Are you talking about the transportation of that waste?
Well, if anything were to go wrong there at the site, let's say they were to overheat or,
Well, I mean, they would have to refer to, I mean, part of the license, there's emergency plans that they have to follow to mitigate
Okay.
any type of hotspots.
So who would provide emergency services if anything were to go wrong?
I'd have to refer to the license to find out what that says. I don't have that before me.
Anybody?
I'm sure the facility would have that information.
Okay, thank you.
If somebody can take that question, you're sure welcome to.
Dr. Rieger, you have.
Thank you.
I mean, WCS has their own services, their own personnel and equipment to deal with it. And they also have agreements with local fire and police departments to assist.
Thank you.
Some questions that were not there.
Thank you, Timothy Ganley. So the first question I have is, our pro tem judge, Andrick, and one of our commissioners, Walter, had requested a public hearing on this matter. And in this letter dated December 21st, TCEQ said to move forward with removing the line of federal waste as expeditiously as possible. We respectfully deny the request for a public meeting. However, you had stated that you would be here today, so I assume that this is the only opportunity our community is going to have to ask questions about this.
Yes.
So this waste was originally brought to Andrews in 2014. It's now 2024. So I guess 10 years doesn't sound very expeditious. So how did we get to the point where 10 years later we're stuck with this wood waste here in Andrews?
I'll have Ashley answer that. Longer.
I'm Ashley Wars, I'm the Deputy Director, Office of Waste, Radioactive Materials Division. It's been a long, complex journey. Highlights are that when the waste was temporarily brought to Texas, it was because there was a fire going towards the labs at Los Alamos. So it was a courtesy to the state of New Mexico on behalf of Texas. When the waste got here, an incident happened at another facility with a similar type of waste. That's called a VIP convention, Waste Isolation Pilot Plant. Because of that, federal government, they're the generator of this waste, so it is their prerogative to decide how to characterize it. In this case, they put a code on it. It's called a record code, D001. That limited its transportation, so that has stalled the waste at WCS ever since. We have been meeting with the federal government, with the Department of Energy, for years on this. They've studied it, and they studied it some more. They've just finished another study, and we have referred them to our Attorney General's office to help expedite the removal. So they're taking this seriously, the federal government is. They have engaged us more recently, and they have a contract with WCS that they could probably speak to more in more detail to get the waste prepared for shipment out of Texas, which is what our directive has been, is to get that waste out of Texas where it belongs, to a federal facility, which we believe will probably be the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant. For years, TCEQ has, with a license with WCS, monitored this waste. We do not believe it has any potential for a situation to happen like happened in New Mexico in 2014. They had thermocouples on it for years. There was no activity, so we are not concerned whatsoever. It's now just a paperwork issue. The federal government has to decide if they're going to remove those codes, and I believe they're going to if they're going to remove the waste. And so what's happening in this amendment is as simply as getting the waste from where it's been sitting into a building to prepare it for shipment out of Texas. And that's why we figured that people want information, we can provide it. We just didn't need to stall that amendment. We wanted to keep it on track so we can move forward to getting that waste out of WCS. It's in an inconvenient location because it's been 10 years almost. So it does need to be moved.
Yeah, a couple thoughts.
So in this letter of May of 2022 from the TCQ to the NRC, or I'm sorry, to the Department of Energy, you noted that the DOE must remove the volunteer U.S. Moist Control Specialist at Andrews County, Texas, and transport out of Texas no later than May 31st, 2022, or the TCQ will initiate additional enforcement actions against the DOE. So we're basically at the mercy of the feds, it sounds like, whenever we allow them to bring that waste into our community. But have you been able to take any enforcement actions against the DOE as indicated in your letter?
I can't speak to the specific enforcement actions. There was enforcement action in 2015 that was issued by TCQ. All I can say is that at this point we have referred this case to the DOE to the Office of the Attorney General for that type of enforcement. So I don't know where that is with the Attorney General's office, but that's where we have sent it.
And the last thing I have on the land waste, in the picture you indicated that it's buried, it looks like, inside the federal waste facility or covered by dirt inside the federal waste facility. How did it come to get inside the federal waste facility? Why is it buried in sand? Why isn't it just sitting in the casks, stored? Normally, why do they have to put it under the dirt?
I think that was,
What Dave Carlson.
yeah, I'll let Dave answer that question.
Yeah, so the reason for that is that it's hot in West Texas in the summertime. So the situation was there was not a good understanding initially of what happened at the WIP facility. But what happened at the WIP facility, for folks that aren't familiar, was there was a drum in the WIP facility where the top blew off the thing and it caused a contamination event. And that contamination event cost them a lot of money because they maintain that facility completely clean of any kind of radioactivity. Well, when that happened, they weren't sure what caused it, and we have those on our site. So what we did, they're drums that are sitting inside a specific kind of overpack that is a box that holds 4 drums. And we took those, and you've seen the modular concrete containers that we use, and we stacked those inside the modular concrete containers, and we put gravel in there with it. Now, there was concern that, that DOE couldn't tell us what was going to happen with that waste, so they said, okay, keep it to the coolest external temperature that you can. And so what we did, after discussions with our regulator, after discussions with the DOE experts, was we put it down in the cell because that was a colder location for it to be, and we put earthen cover over it in order to keep the temperature down. So that we were seeing exterior temperatures that were considerably raised in the summertime. We certainly get 110 degrees out there sometimes, but when the sun's shining on something, it gets even hotter. So it's really a desire to control the temperature.
Okay, there's no more questions. I'll go ahead and grab our commissioner to come back in, and we can have another discussion on GTCC and what NRC is proposing to do. So, thank you.
Bob, if you could do this, come on up. Thank you, appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much, and I appreciate y'all humoring me getting kicked out of the room. There's a very clear divide that the attorneys enforce between the executive director's part of our agency and the 3 commissioners' obligation to act on the decisions of the executive director on matters where the public or the regulated entities themselves may be parties along with the EDs in a case that comes before us. So it's similar to how judges avoid attorneys or plaintiffs in terms of the ex parte worries that lawyers have. Our agencies constantly have that dodging obligation. So I have no clue exactly what Jan said about the activities of CS, but I appreciate the opportunity to come down and visit and attend and meet with many of y'all today to hear about your perspective on WCS. And this is a a site and a project of years and of generations and of consequence, where it's not going anywhere. It's a resource that should serve our state and can serve our nation for years and years, if utilized correctly, if used prudently. And I'm proud of it. On behalf of the state of Texas, for me personally, I'm really proud of the successes that the state of Texas has found and made in working in a partnership with the community of people at Andrews and the operators, the waste control specialists. It's the company that was willing to take a gamble on a one-of-a-kind arrangement, a public-private partnership, where it really is the only compact facility that was constructed since Congress in the 80s said, states, come forth and form compacts and go build sites. There were 4 sites around in the country at that time. One of those sites has since closed. WCS is open. Not much has changed in the game except for WCS opening, because Texas and Vermont formed an interstate compact in response to Congress's call to the states to address the problem of low-level radioactive waste. And Texas is the only site, the only state, and the Texas-Vermont Compact, the only compact who have constructed a facility since that time. And so at WCS's site, the disposal facility really is one that is tremendously more protective, but also tremendously more costly compared to the other existing competitors out in the world, out in our country. And the simple fact of the state of Texas grappling with the obligation to serve as regulator and oversee the activities of the site, while also not wasting the resource that is the Texas Compact Facility, the site location that serves and answers the call from Congress, where we're now in a joint partnership with the state of Vermont and the U.S. government, the Congress in this interstate compact, this interstate agreement to keep this facility open. It puts lawmakers and decision makers in Austin in a more serious, even more serious obligation of wanting to make sure that everything's responded to here. And so I've worked on this facility, this issue from a number of different positions. I worked for State Representative Tryon Lewis during the 82nd legislative session in 2011, and continued working for him in the interim after that period for some time. So I got to see firsthand work for the Andrews community while y'all were a member of his House district at that time. And that was the session that the waste control specialists really cemented through the legislature what the terms of import from out of state would be. And that represented a monumental change in the expectations of what WCS meant for the state of Texas and for our country in terms of the expectations at the onset, the beginning of that compact, that agreement, and the licensing, the opening of licenses for applicants to come apply for a license to run a site to serve as the Texas Compact Facility. Everything about the assumptions that I think the state policymakers knew and thought and expected at that time, were really expecting there to be a big universe of Class B and Class C waste sitting around waiting to be disposed of with lots and lots of money behind it. And the problem that Texas would have would be keeping WCS from making too much money too quickly and filling up the site too quickly. And I think that it's really safe to say since then that that was not at all an accurate assumption in terms of how much industry really responded and grew savvy to the limitations, not just the closure of the other commercial facilities for Class B and C waste, but also just the acts of Congress and the acts of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to establish that. And that's the next slide that I'm going to come to in terms of expectations for what the regulators and the nation would set in terms of the standards for safety and prudence, and then how that panned out. So I came to work and cross paths with the WCS at the time that they were trying to submit with the rest of the state legislature what the terms of that reality of them being the first site constructed to real technical standards since those began to get needed out and created from the 80s. All the other sites that they're competing against were created and built before that time. So the state of Texas was grappling with the idea that we couldn't stick to the deal we thought we would have, which is just Texas and Vermont in a compact that we could put up hard walls and say no one else can bring waste into the state. No one else can bring their waste in here. And so we're in a compact now. We've solved the interstate commerce clause problem, and now we can keep everybody else out. We realized quickly that Texas's waste alone and the single decommissioning power facility in Vermont alone would not be enough to fund and cover the cost of the facility that's built to the specs and costs of WCS. And the legislature recognized that and opened legal pathway for import or out-of-state, out-of-compact waste to go through the Interstate Compact Commission. That 6 of those members are appointed by the Texas governor and 2 of those members are appointed by the Vermont governor. So if out-of-state waste came in, the Texas Legislature Act and the Governor signed the law that requires a premium on those wastes that come from outside of Texas or Vermont. And that reflected a big change in the expectations of what WCS would represent and what WCS would actually be doing in the day-to-day. And the topic that I'm here to talk about today represents another iteration of what might be another inflection point, might be another recognition of the protectiveness that WCS's disposal site is built to, the level of rigor and protectiveness, and what kind of wastes that can accommodate safely. And it's not at all a decision that is presupposed or set in stone or likely to transpire. But I do want to sketch out a little bit, very briefly, what greater than Class C is from a non-technical perspective. I'm not a scientist. I have served for 5 years at TCEQ as a manager in Chance's role over very, very, very capable and talented scientists such as Dr. Wager. So hopefully my understanding and explanation will be easily correctable by our scientists or the lawyers listening from afar or in our room with us. And then I'll highlight a few of the changes in how much the federal government and the expectations around what waste disposal would look like and what practices today. I'll highlight some of those, and then I'll come finally to the timeline for what a path forward on greater than Class C might look like if the federal government sticks to their plan, and a final slide is just a snapshot of their timeline. So the first slide is just what, very, very simply, greater than Class C waste is. It is, by definition of congressional actions over 1980, 82, 85, it's clear as mud. But my best understanding of it is greater than Class C waste is low-level waste. It is not low-level waste that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission gave any ability or clear path for the agreement states to handle and dispose of with the rest of the low-level waste universe of Class A, Class B, Class C waste. It was something they reserved for a more protective type of disposal, but it was never not low-level waste. And there are other things called transuranic waste that can overlap with greater than Class C waste or any other classes of waste, but transuranic waste is very definitionally is explicitly not low-level waste. And so in terms of, I like this chart that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission used in one of their many, many guidance documents or informational documents. We can find out exactly where that was if anyone's curious and wants to know where it came from. But just very simply, greater than Class C waste is definitionally something that falls under what could be agreement state, safe territory. The NRC has always explicitly said there's going to be extra hurdles attached to it. And in 2014, the state of Texas, the WCS presented rulemaking to TCEQ, and the TCEQ commissioners instructed staff to initiate the rulemaking and get answers. Really, the foundational first question was, can the state of Texas have oversight of this activity, this regulatory permission? Can Texas authorize disposal of greater than Class C waste? So it was a very pointed question from WCS that the TCEQ commissioners at that time instructed staff to initiate the conversation with NRC And that's all that the approval of TCQ on the rulemaking really represents. There's no other commitments or expectations that, and go do it. It was really and come back to us. I recall I was in staff's seat at the time and remember profoundly there's a green light to try to figure out this logjam of a regulatory problem. And the problem is just that GTCC has been left in a donut hole. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission made very clear, explicit instructions on the path for how to handle ABC waste, low-level waste, low radioactive waste. They never delved into the greater than class C piece. The federal expectations for how to attack high-level waste were also getting looked at and addressed by Congress at different times, and that's largely a story that ends at Yucca Mountain. But neither of those different sources of activity cross paths are actually addressed with the GTCC that was trapped in the donut hole in the middle. And so WCS highlighted the point that there is a big inventory of wastes that are out there, some of which are used in and around our oil field as just little sources on the end of a pigtail that you'll use in any sort of well integrity testing or gauges. These are devices that are used in and around our hospitals, some of them. And so it was a legitimate open policy question that our commission recognized, and we sent a letter to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission asking their response and additional information to clarify this question. I would say the Nuclear Regulatory Commission since that time has described the state of Texas as requesting or supporting or seeking disposal of GTCC. And to that, I would push back and say that's overstating where the state of Texas is. We acknowledged, our commission acknowledged what WCS highlighted in a petition to us, a rulemaking petition, that highlighted a regulatory donut hole, and we asked the appropriate federal agency, what's the story? On my third slide, we'll come to, it's going to be years from now before that story is answered. The NRC, we can skip there now, that would be really good. The NRC said, you know what, let's answer this. Good idea, staff. Y'all address greater than class C and start looking at it. Let's stop the actions we've been taking for the last decades, I think, more than 1 decade at least, to update Part 61 low-level radioactive waste rules. So the NRC, frustratingly for the public, many of the members of the public, not just in Texas or English County, paused and delayed and halted and ultimately attached the inquiry about greater than class C. There, what appears to me, among the discussion of those commissioners so far, some general agreement that staff should look at the issue, that perhaps there are some wastes that fall under the greater than class C regulatory bucket that would be appropriate and could be safely disposed of in a near-service site, a near-service disposal site that exists today, not as existed in the 80s when the rules and regulations were initially established by the NRC. And if we can step back one slide, I'll come to that point now and make that. And so this shows, it's another slide from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and it shows a good snapshot of the technical assumptions that they document and speak to as of 1982, when the Low Voice Policy Act, I forget the exact federal act that was passed in 1982, but the Low Voice Policy Act of 1980 was passed, and so the NRC was working on it at that time, and they were passing a lot of the rules that talked about greater than class C and talked about the different classification tables of waste. And so the thinking, and in this time, what assumptions in 1982 the NRC were making, I think are really powerful and important to speak to the limitations of what they knew, or what the assumptions they had then that simply have not panned out now. And you can see opposite them precisely how far off we're at. So for the waste hazard condition, they were looking at about 100 years out for Class A and B wastes, and about 500 years out for Class C wastes. Today, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission recognizes that some Class A wastes, some wastes that are Class A by default because they simply weren't addressed in the 1980 rulemaking, 1980 80s rulemaking, such as depleted uranium, which is a really big one, they're being disposed of in greater quantities than assumed, and they could pose hazards past these periods. Depleted uranium, why is that special? Why is that unique? That's one of a relatively small number of radioactive materials, radioactive wastes that will not decay and get cooler over time. The progeny, the daughter products of what depleted uranium will decay into actually have an increase and will actually slowly grow and slowly build, and can happen over millennia, over thousands of years. And we'll have a source, peak dose many years out than when the Class A 100-year target that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission staff were using as a rule of set of general assumptions for what dose limits do we want to set for Class A wastes, Class B wastes. Let's look out to about 100 years. How will the public be affected here? And the second row here, second line, the assumption at the time, only the Department of Energy would enrich uranium. Depleted uranium, at that time, was only commercially available in very small quantities. Today, we actually see that many private sector enrichment facilities exist. One is right across our line, our state line. Urenco is our neighbor, where the depleted uranium waste stream may be a private sector, not a explicitly DOE concern. The next slide, the average disposed waste concentrations are expected to be well below the class limits. Industry, it turns out, are really good at responding to regulators' actions, and the blended wastes are actually creating waste streams that are much closer to the class limit. If you give a stop limit to the industry, they'll be really good at making sure their processes take full advantage of that category. So they were producing wastes. They got really close to each different category. And then finally, greater than Class C waste disposal in a geologic repository, something like Yucca Mountain, something in a deep disposal, or by explicit commission approval, explicit permission by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. It was really their assumption at that time. Today, the NRC staff recognizes that they're considering near-surface disposal within the top 30 meters, so about 90 feet deep, for certain greater than Class C waste streams. And the Nuclear Regulatory Commission technical staff have talked about what certain waste streams might mean, what they may entail. Generally, it's like most radioactive wastes, the lower activity part of it represents a larger volume. And so I think closer to 75 to 80% of the greater than Class C inventory that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission staff looks around the country and looks at and surveys and say, what do we think is out there? What greater than Class C waste is out there? When they analyze it and try to predict what sort of technical performance would we expect, could we put it in a near-surface disposal facility, something at depth of 90 feet, or does it need to be disposed of at an extreme depth, something like Yucca Mountain? They're finding a majority of the waste, the GTCC waste, probably could go into a near-surface disposal facility. That is a decision that they're working slowly towards, which, if we can go to the next slide, one more final slide to the right here, you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, the top and bottom of the two tracks here on the Lincoln Guidance show, November 2025 is the date the Nuclear Regulatory Commission currently is reserving or expecting to publish a final rule and issue a final guidance that would represent a decision where perhaps the state of Texas, the agreement states in our country, could decide at that point to take on oversight of disposal of some subset of greater than Class C waste. So that's the starting gun, the starting pistol for states. If you want to do this, here's the final rule, the final guidance, how to do so. You can decide to do this if you want to. Currently, the state of Texas has a rule that our agency passed that says you may not dispose greater than Class C waste in Texas. So that rule would need to be changed or struck. In fact, that was the rule petition that I think WCS pointed to in their legal specific petition. Dear TCQ, please delete this line that says you cannot dispose of GTCC because we would like you to ask NRC for permission to do so. And we still need to, if the NRC were to decide some subset of GTCC could be appropriate for agreement states to decide to let private entities dispose of it inside of their territory, that's the soonest that we would expect a decision to come before the state of Texas to start the process to opt to allow WCS to dispose of it. If the NRC said yes, you could do so, if WCS could demonstrate and prove that some portion of the GTCC waste they could technically demonstrate could be disposed of in their facility and would not harm a member of the public. That rulemaking change takes over a year. So if that starts at the end of 2025, I don't think our commission would be finished before the end of 2026 with a rule change. And then, as I understand it, I believe WCS could apply for and initiate a license amendment that would acknowledge their ability to perhaps dispose of graded and Class C waste. And it would finally not have a rule conflict saying they could do so. I suspect we would have some very painful, extensive guidance documents about what an application for GTCC disposal would look like in Texas, reflecting what the NRC by that time will probably have out in terms of expectations for agreement states if they are allowing this. So all I want to say is we move at the speed of government, which is always shockingly slow at times. But in terms of very real risks that I want to validate and acknowledge that residents of our community and Andrews point to and look at and say, this is something that represents a different deal than I remember with this part of my county, my home. What does this mean? And how soon could this affect me? I want y'all to just know where I am, where our agency is, and look to us to give you more of the story for what the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is considering, what the Department of Energy is considering. These are all, they are moving pieces and moving tracks, but moving on very slow and deliberate and methodical timelines that hopefully we can help allay your concerns about what it might mean and when you might expect it to actually translate to something that could impact y'all directly here in the community. And if there are community concerns that arise from any of those developments, I hope that we are able in that time, given a few years notice by the NRC that they're considering this change, to really dig into and understand what worries you have, what concerns you have, and get you a good answer to those questions, or ultimately leave that in the capable hands of the folks who will come up with the answers. I don't want to belabor it. We are available for questions, and I appreciate the chance to come speak with you all a little bit more. If you have a question, it speaks to anything WCS is trying to do right now with amendments or with their renewal, I would respectfully ask that you please direct it to our agency staff. But I would really love to engage with y'all on anything further out, anything with a rulemaking requirement attached to it. I have a little more safe space to visit directly with members of the public, and I really do appreciate this chance to get to visit with all of y'all here today.
I do have some questions about the GTCC. Thank you. Timothy Ganway here. So the letter that you had mentioned that you sent the NRC, I actually have a copy of it here. It says the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality considered a petition by Waste Control Specialist LLC WCS requesting a change to TCQ rules to remove prohibitions against disposal of greater than Class C waste, GTCC like waste, and transuranic waste to its TCQ licensed facilities. So it's a little different than kind of how you explained it. It does sound like your letter actually said that's what they want to do. And in fact, in several letters that they sent to the NRC, they mentioned that their site's perfect and they're going to prove how their site's perfect. And it's great that, we're looking at a year or two before the rules are finalized, but we don't want to wait till they're done before we start taking action. We want to be proactive, not reactive, so we don't end up like some of these other communities. So, in speaking with the people here, we are a little concerned because the NRC describes GTCC LLRW as aligned with the International Atomic Energy Association definition of intermediate level waste, which is something most other countries have. So here in the US, we only have high level or low level. And I think Japan's the same way, but most countries have this intermediate level, which our GTCC would be classified as, which is what the website accepts for, the federal defense-related wastes and anything that can be classified related to that. So we do have concerns, that you're saying, well, let's just hold on, let's wait till the feds are done and everything's done, and then if we don't want to pursue it, we can't. There's only 1 of 4 sites that I'm understanding based on some of these WCS letters. There's 4 sites that could be considered for this, but only 1 that has shown an interest or is actually being considered, which is the WCS site here in Andrews. So is there anybody else that's in the running for this, or is our community pretty much the only one at this point that's being eyed for GTCC disposal?
I appreciate the question. I'm not aware of other sites specifically chasing after or throwing their hat in the ring on GTCC. I know that GTCC disposals have happened in some of the other local waste disposal facilities in the country. There is a case-by-case option for GTCC disposal through the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and in the entire time that I was with the agency, in the executive director side, and in the time since I've been appointed as a commissioner, I've always been well aware and half expecting that WCS may show up and have a very specific shipment in hand and a very specific request, and choose to go through that pathway. I've since heard that perhaps that was a route utilized for disposals that happened, and federal action on it rather than a cleanup would have been the better option there. I need to better educate myself about where those case-by-case disposals have happened. I always kept it flagged in my mind for, we'll need to go explore that deeply if and when WCS presents this sort of request for us.
Well, I'm hoping a case-by-case that the community would have an option just
Speak
because.
slower, people are having a hard time hearing you online.
So I hope it'd be, if it was on a case-by-case basis, I hope that as a community we have a chance to have a say, but if it was just granted in the license overall, then obviously we would no longer have any option or have a say in that. But I'm a little concerned because I've heard a lot of people, including WCS employees, say that they have not taken any initiative on GTCC whenever it looks like they actually initiated the entire process for the NRC's rulemaking on GTCC. And like I said, this letter, April 16, 2018, which is after the site was sold to New York-based JF Lehman, so this is after it's already changed hands. They continue to say we tend to explain how the WS facility will meet the NRC's recommended basis for disposal facility of this type of waste, specifically the GTCC, like in transuranic waste. So it does seem like we're kind of being told one thing, but the documents and the history of this kind of say another thing. That's all I have. I appreciate your time.
I appreciate that point.
Thank you. Hi, Commissioner. You mentioned, early on, you were talking about the cost of doing business. It's very expensive to run the facility, and therefore they expanded the site and expanded the waste. And it seems like you were implying that therefore they are now expanding into greater than Class C. In the oil and gas industry, we're faced with a lot of regulations, and they've been tightening up a lot. For example, right now in New Mexico. And if we don't comply, we don't go and cry and say, well, it's really expensive. And you pack up and you move on, or you comply. WCS is just an operator. There are others that can operate this facility. So I don't see how we can have a sign that says free enterprise and then always go and coddle and give them more because they're not making enough money. That's a comment. My second comment is, yes, November 2025, it's a ways off, but the government's already asking for comment right now, January and May 17th. And I think the state of Texas is sending someone May 17th to Washington to submit comment on our behalf. So it's imperative that we have this conversation now. Thank you.
I appreciate the comments.
I believe I heard you say that GTCC was not allowed by the state to be in the state. David, I'm sorry, when I get up there close enough, I'm usually pretty loud on my own. So David's informed us, or the WCS has, that they've already been at the site, it's material. So you might want to define the difference between storage and disposal for their benefits so people understand. The other thing around is that maybe the doctor will have to answer, but can you explain to us the difference in cubics or the volume versus curies between GTTC and ABC?
Yes, yeah, very much so, thank you. That's a really good point, thank you. GTCC storage is within the line of what the Texas rules allow in terms of the storage, processing, handling of radioactive materials, radioactive waste. The prohibition in our rules is specific to disposal, and it prohibits the disposal of greater than Class C. I acknowledge your point. I think that you're absolutely right. If storage to up to and to eternity is disposal, if I have to beg the question then to you, the members of the public, who should we, or where should we, as the state regulatory agency, draw the line in terms of storage becoming disposal for other wastes, for oil and gas field wastes, for hazardous chemical type wastes? Some of the prickliest wastes that are still in storage, not just at WCS, but at other facilities in and around the state of Texas, are there for some hazardous characteristic or some hazardous descriptive regulatory tag that keeps it from being transported or moved. And I think the question is it's a good one. It's a legitimate one. Is there some period of time when storage becomes de facto disposal? And should state laws acknowledge that, or should state regulatory agencies acknowledge that? I will simply point out the dangerous game that is trying to take on powers or authorities outside of your state agency's strict box. And so I think that's a really good question. I don't think our agency would lean into it absent direction from the legislature or state leadership. Which is to say, please don't look to us, expect us to define it, because that's a very politically implicit question that I think we would recognize the likelihood that our elected officials would want to have a say on where you draw that line. And I think that's a very worthwhile question to ask in terms of this context, in terms of where the citizens of Andrews feel comfortable. What's your expectation on when wastes or materials stored in your backyard, when should we no longer call them stored? When should we call them disposed? When should we start fighting for the safety that comes with the disposal, or the fair payment that is due that comes with the disposal? If a federal shipment of waste owned by the federal government is parked in Texas and goes over a certain length of time, should we sue the federal government and try to say this is disposed right here? We need to. There's big implications where this is a very worthwhile thread to pull on this puzzle. But I'll turn to the other piece of the other question you asked on what volume and curies. What are those two things? And then with the waste, if we could turn to the different waste slide, if you don't mind, out the one with all the bubbles, circles. So there's two different descriptors, two different factors on the low level waste. I'm probably repeating description you've heard, or a definition you may have heard from Chance. But we measure it in volume, in cubic feet, or cubic yards, cubic meters, some other dimension there, or radioactivity. And we measure it in curies, where it is an industry standard for the number, the degree of decay of those radioactive elements at that time, just to have a simplest apples to apples comparison. There's other ways to express and measure radioactivity, and so that adds to a lot of confusion in talking about this. We use curies. It's defined in the state law and statute. And curies, complicatingly enough, are not permanent. They change over time. And I mentioned earlier in my remarks, talking about some wastes that will have ingrowth. Depleted uranium is one example of that. The curies you might measure and express on a discrete quantity of depleted uranium, I would expect that would increase over thousands and thousands of years. And other wastes, curies actually decrease over time. And so turning to these different types of waste streams on volume and on curies, it's generally an opposite relationship. The lower, less hazardous classification and type of waste, generally that correlates to a bigger quantity. There's a lot more of the lower activity waste. And so as you go up in curies, you go down in volume generally. And that corresponds generally with those different classes of waste streams. So there's the most class A out in the universe, little less than A, B, class C is smaller than those two. GTCC represents a smaller universe yet. I believe the transuranic wastes apply to a smaller universe than just GTCC. But those represent higher radioactivities. And so it turns out to be a useful general trend in the relationship. But that reminds me of a point I thought to make in response to Monica's comment earlier in terms of WCS's statement about not seeking grading in Class C. I'm not gonna disagree or speak further on that exact contention, other than to recognize that part of what WCS has done and brought to the relationship with the state of Texas in operating the license, in my opinion, is that they have been very eager to look at what the site they built, the level of rigor, the level of protectiveness it can sustain. They've been very eager to look elsewhere in the regulatory world to find where are other wastes that could suitably dispose of at WCS. I don't think there's any question about that. I don't think that's any secret. And I think that that's been a point where they brought value to the relationship with the state of Texas, because it has finally shaken loose a industry and a relationship with the federal government that has just been stagnant for decades. And it's partly spurred by the new technology, small modular reactors, the new advanced reactors. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission has taken a lot of actions recently and are taking big strides there. I think the other piece of what's spurred them to move has been some of the requests and some of the new developments from WCS, which has changed dramatically the landscape of where can people safely find places to dispose of and legally dispose of different types of waste. One example of that is in the other direction from GTCC, going down in activity. I mentioned the bigger volume of Class A waste and the smaller radioactivity. Looking at their obligation to containerize that Class A waste, if they brought it into the facility, WCS quickly presented a proposal where they could bulk dispose that waste and ultimately cover it and put lifts of concrete over it to build up a monolith of bulk disposed Class A waste. The legislature soon came in and said, you can't do that for waste unless it's Texas only waste or Vermont only waste. And so there's a obligation that WCS is continuing to carry, but I think they were quick to recognize that that wasn't bringing value to really the state and the public, in terms of it wasn't meaningfully moving the dose at all for where the members of the public might be expected to receive any sort of a dose from the WCS facility over the lifetime when it will present a hazard to the public and to the environment. And so they wanted to acknowledge and remove the unnecessary costs where it was built in that represented a cost to the people coming to dispose of it. Our agency is sensitive to to their pressure to try to find those opportunities. But ultimately, we're looking at the technical impacts of those requests. And we're sensitive to where WCS says, this is really important to us, this really matters. Well, okay, fine, but we have to be able to look at the technical case. And the real success story, I think, that WCS has seen is in terms of the low activity waste disposal that has been authorized into their record disposal cell, which is on the western side of the site. That has opened the opportunity for Class A waste to be safely disposed of in a cell that outperforms other commercial Class A waste disposal facilities in terms of performance. They've run a performance analysis on that. RCRA stands for Resource Conservation Recovery Act. It's a federal act that talks about hazardous waste, industrial waste disposal facilities. So WCS had first and foremost built on their site an industrial waste disposal cell. It was largely really going unused, and presenting a proposal to us that we could look over and evaluate the performance of how a quantity of very, very low activity waste of the pyramid of Class A waste, the largest volume of the lowest activity waste anyway, taking the lowest, I forget what fraction of it, only setting their heights, their sites that high, they were able to demonstrate that industrial waste cell, that RCRA cell performed just as well as a low waste disposal cell. It was a technical analysis miles beyond what any other disposal site in this country has presented to a state or federal regulator. And we were able to grant a pathway, a disposal pathway in the license and in the RCRA permit for very low activity, low level radioactive waste to be safely disposed of in the RCRA cell, where it's significantly cheaper than it's ever been, would have been required to go into the compact waste facility. And that represents a tremendous cost savings and an opportunity for the waste generators that shook up the industry in tremendous ways that are happening off-scene and off-site. And we encounter it as the regulator indirectly through the industry or through requests that WCS make as industry practices change over time. So I'm talking way too long here, and I'd love to get to another question or any other comment for the next line in our agenda.
Yes, sir, Commissioner. To say that the state agrees with WCS is looking for other types of waste to expand, to dispose of other types of waste, I think, I don't know how to put this. It's wrong. That is, when they have looked for other types of waste like spent nuclear fuel and reactor-related greater capacity, the state passed a law to stop them. They're fighting the state in court because they still want it. But the state does not necessarily agree with them expanding into other types of waste. And I think that was a misstatement or erroneous.
Yes, ma'am. Can I clarify? I believe I said it in my opinion, and I stand by that. I agree.
But you're
with
a state agent.
point.
You represent the state, so.
I don't apply that statement to every request that WCS made or every thought that they had, and I agree with you that the state of Texas has spoken clearly on that point, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Timothy Ganaway here again. So I was just hoping you could clarify, because just a moment ago you said that some of this low activity Class A radioactive waste that originally would have been going into the compact has actually been put into the RCRA cell?
I think it's more accurate to say that it would have been cost prohibitive to dispose of in the compact.
Right, but if it was disposed of in the compact, our county would have got 5%, whereas when it's disposed in the RCRA, we don't get anything. Is that correct? If
the waste generators were forced to dispose of at the market rates for compact waste facility disposal, it would generate a revenue to the state, but I'm not aware of any obligation for generators to dispose of waste like that.
Sure, but you're saying that it would be cheaper for them in the long run, but ultimately for our community, we don't get anything out of it when they do that. So it may be better off for them, but for us, I don't see that as the case. That's all I have.
Chuck Raymond, I'm a citizen here. You said that the NRC defined GTCC different from the Class A, Class B, and Class C, and that they put hurdles on it, that they had to dispose of it because it was different. And you said probably 70 to 80% of the GTCC, and the examples you used was oil field and hospital waste. Just examples. Just examples, was it 70 to 80%?
No, those were examples of GTCC. I think 70 to 80% of GTCC waste is what the NRC, it seems likely the NRC would say is safe, that agreement states could consider that for disposal in appropriate disposal facilities. I don't want to speak to what percentage of GTCC out there is oil field waste. I think it's relatively little for oil field and relatively little for medical, but both of those do go into that universe.
Okay, for what they're applying for, does that include all of GTCC, even this that is above that the NRC is saying is more, but it's different from the low level?
What do you mean by they're applying for?
You said that, well, to accept GTCC at their plan. Is that what they're doing?
They I think it's likely WCS would present an amendment that would ask us to authorize their disposal of GTCC. All they've done is asked us to change the rule, to strike the rule that prohibits disposal of GTCC. And if the NRC authorizes, if the NRC says any portion of GTCC is appropriate for agreement states to consider for disposal, which my understanding is that's roughly 75, 80% of the GTCC universe would probably would likely fall into that universe. Then the state of Texas can elect to respond, to do something. If the NRC says that states can do this, then we could consider if we want to authorize rules or if we want to put in requirements for what GTCC disposal in Texas requires. Currently there's a clear prohibition. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission has excluded GTCC from the rest of the existing Part 61 rules that we're using for disposal here.
Probably for a safety reason.
They recognize it as likely more appropriate for deeper disposal, which to the earlier comment, I think does recognize the intermediate disposal category that exists in Europe and of the existing disposal facilities in the United States. Because WCS was the only low-level radioactive waste site built to modern technical rigor and level, I think it's the closest and only one in our country that would come close to being described of as an intermediate disposal facility. Though it was not held to those standards or held to test well.
Okay, and earlier you said that Congress decided that the WCS was not getting enough revenue just with Vermont and Texas, so they started taking outside sources.
The state of Texas legislature made clear in the law, in Texas law, that outside of Texas, non-Texas, non-Vermont waste could be disposed of at WCS if the Compact Commission says they can. And they have to pay a higher price on it, and there's certain limits on it.
Yeah, well, I thought you said that they started taking it from other outside sources because they decided they weren't making enough money to justify their facility.
I can't speak to the why, on why the legislature made the change in law. As one of the legislative staff working for one of the elected officials at the time, that was my understanding. That was part of the reasoning that the change in law, I thought at that time was necessary.
Will they make any decision on how much profit they should make, where they should draw the line, or is it just
exactly that point was a point of contention. I remember getting into a bit of a point of friction with members of the staff of the State Affairs Committee who also served the Ways and Means Committee for the House. They wanted to increase the surcharge on non-Texas waste that came into WCS. It was 20%. I think they wanted at least 30%. They wanted even higher, frankly, and we ended up compromising, and we put a requirement to put a fee study in the law, and it saddled TCQ with the obligation to look at exactly that. Is this the appropriate fee? Is this the right surcharge? And I thought I was off the answering that very difficult question. I laughingly dusted my hands off, and then I found myself 4 or 5 years later at the agency responsible for making sure that that study was written.
Okay, thank you.
Side.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
If we could, we need to continue on with the program. We've got quite a bit to do. Bobby, thank you, I appreciate it. For right now, we're going to go, I'm going to ask Dave Crawford, we're going to talk about the WCS permits and license summary. And then he'll have a presentation with some questions and answers for him. Then we'll open it up to public comment. So that way we can keep ourselves full. Thank you, Dave.
Yeah, thanks, Bob.
How's that? Better? Okay, so this is the part of the program that we originally planned, because this is what the community engagement panel asked for, was some discussion of WCS licenses and permits. I would love to talk to you about some of the other topics that we just covered, but this is really what's on the agenda. Maybe some of that can come up in the questions. So next slide. So let me start on the next slide with who are the WCS regulators. And here's a list of them. There's more than this, but these are the main regulators. And certainly our number one regulator is the TCEQ. They are most involved in our licenses and permits, but we also deal with DSHS, Department of State Health Services, the Compact Commission, the New Mexico Environment Department, even though none of our facilities are on New Mexico land, and even though we have no discharges or anything like that that affect New Mexico land, we're still required to have a discharge permit with them. OSHA, the US EPA, and you can go on down the list and see some of the other folks that affect us. Some of the unusual ones are Department of Agriculture. If we take soil in, we have to meet Department of Agriculture requirements before we dispose of it. Or the Federal Communications Commission, we use radios on the site, and I'm sure some of you here use radios as well. You're required in your business to have licenses for those radios. Next slide, and this is probably the most important one. This is some of the key regulations for us. So, starting with statute, up at the top, you have Texas Health and Safety Code, subtitle D, and that's where a lot of things come about that apply to us. And the statute, of course, for anybody who's not a lawyer in the room, the statute is the part that's passed by the regulator, and the rule is the part that is actually the responsibility of the agency. So those things up top are in statutes, and you can look those up. All of that is online and available to you. Then Texas Administrative Code, Title 30, Environmental Quality, that material, that's agency regulations that the agency puts in place through their rulemaking process. And those are some of the ones that apply to us. I'm not going to talk to them or mention them specifically, but you can write them down, take a picture, whatever you want, so you know where they are. Then we get into other Texas Administrative Code for health services. So again, I said we're affected by DSHS. This would be their regulations that they put into effect. And honestly, there are many, many other regulations that apply. Anybody in the room who's in business understands, the stacks of books that you could have of regulations that apply to your business. Now, there's also federal regulations that are important to us. The very first one there, Part 61, is interesting because that only indirectly applies to us. That's because the Nuclear Regulatory Commission passes the regulations in 10 CFR Part 61, but Texas, as an agreement state, takes those regulations that they pass and they go through it and they say, well, we like this part and we don't like that part. And we think this part's good and we think we got to be more strict in this part over here. And so that's indirect to us. We don't actually live by the 10 CFR 61 regulations. We live by the Texas regulations that flow down from that. Then you see other regulations on packaging, transportation, radioactive materials, regulations for shippers. So there are federal regulations that do apply to us directly as well. And there are many, many others. But these are the key ones. These are the ones you should look at. These are the ones you should read to understand what we do in our business. Next slide. So when we talk about permits and licenses a bit, and there's no secrets here, everything we have in our permits and licenses appears on our website, and you can go there and get it. So the top three, the ones that are in yellow, are the ones that are most important for the purpose of our discussion. You can look at any of them, but those are the most important. So those are the ones that I'll go over. You see other ones there, like I talked about, the USDA compliance agreement to receive soil and so on. There's acronyms in there. I apologize for acronyms. We have acronyms all over the nuclear and hazardous waste industry. But even if I read out the name of the acronym, like TSCA, what is TSCA? Well, Toxic Substances Control Act. It doesn't really give you more information. It's just an acronym they assign to that. Or CERCLA, Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act. It's super fun. CERCLA is all you really need to know for that because the words don't have much to it. Next slide. All right, so the first one I talked about is our radioactive materials license. So our original radioactive materials license was back in 1997, and back in the day we had the Department of Health Services, Texas Department of Health Services, and that's who issued that license. It was L04971, and that was only for receipt, storage, and processing of radioactive materials. Ultimately, that was incorporated into our next license that was granted by TCEQ, so that license no longer exists, but it's been moved into the next one down there. So our current radioactive materials license, R04100, was approved in September 2009, and the difference there is it included disposal of radioactive materials. Now, we didn't dispose until 2012 because that's when the compact waste facility was completed, but that's when that license went into effect. So you can get that right off our website. You can go pick it up, R04100, 91 pages long. Some of it is easy to read and some of it's a little bit harder to read. But what it provides to you is that list of radioactive materials that are authorized for disposal, for storage, and for processing. There's a bunch of license conditions. Those are things that we have to do to be in compliance with the TCEQ's requirements. And there's a waste acceptance criteria that says specifically what it is we're allowed to accept. Now, as I think Chance mentioned, that is in, we have a renewal application in for that, so it's in timely renewal while they're looking through that document. There's about 34 volumes of that, so it's a whole lot of information. So please go to our website if you want to look at that, take a look at what that says. Next slide. So our hazardous waste permits, so that's the next important things out of that list of yellow items that I showed. So our RCRA permits, Resource Conservation Recovery Act, but just as good, the words don't say much. The RCRA permits allow for treatment, storage, and disposal of hazardous waste. So we can dispose of hazardous waste. More often where this applies to us is something called mixed waste, where it's both hazardous and radioactive. And so we need a hazardous waste permit to deal with that. So the first permit, 5035A, is for our treatment, storage, and disposal facility. What's included there? Well, that's our hazardous waste landfill, and that's our processing facility. So we take hazardous waste, put it in a stable form for disposal. That was approved in 1994, so that's one of our older authorizations, and then renewed by TCEQ in 2005 and then in 2021. So that's disposal, storage, treatment of hazardous and non-hazardous industrial solid waste, including possible waste, another acronym, PCB waste, or what that really means, and radiologically accepted waste. The next permit, 50397, is for the federal waste facility. That applies to disposal only in the federal waste facility. That was approved in 2008 and again renewed by TCEQ. And this authorizes disposal of hazardous and non-hazardous industrial solid waste, including toxic waste in that federal waste facility. Now our R04100 that I mentioned previously restricts that FWF disposal to waste that is also radioactive. So this only applies to waste that is both radioactive and hazardous. Once again, on our website. And with that, I'll move to the next slide, which is questions, and I'd love to go back over any of the other stuff. I love talking about carries. I can tell you exactly why a carry is not a carry is not a carry, because there's so many different aspects to it. I can tell you about all the different kinds of GTCC or low level radioactive waste whenever you'd like to. So Bob, would you like to take questions at this point? Questions, good?
The only thing that I'll ask, the website is transposed on the last slide. So
Correct. WCSTexas.com is our website.
Hello, I'm Pam Fisher from Andrews. I've lived here over 70 years. The first slide that you showed, I believe it said that the primary oversight of WCS is the TCEQ.
Yes, ma'am.
And you are mandated to give TCEQ a percentage off the top of your intake, monetarily.
So the way our surcharges apply is there's different surcharges for different aspects of the business. So for disposal at the compact waste facility, for example, 31.25% of every dollar we receive goes to various surcharges.
And I understand 5% to Andrews, 5% state, 20% TCEQ, 1.25% to the commission?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so the 20% that goes to TCEQ, I'd like to know what percentage of their budget that represents.
So that's more of a state question, but I can tell you that that money goes into a fund that's used by the state of Texas for cleaning up sites.
Right.
So it's a special fund that TCEQ is responsible for, and that the legislature can give approval for TCEQ to use for cleanup of various sites around the state of Texas.
Like the uranium site.
Yes, ma'am, that's a possibility.
Okay. Also, you could probably answer the question, $8 million comes to mind, but a couple of people ask you how much money WCS receives for taking the WIP waste beginning in 2014.
Yes, ma'am. So I'm not going to answer financial questions, but what I can tell you is that there has been a massive expenditure to develop a facility on the surface for temporarily storing that waste until it can get moved out to the website. I'd also like to say, well, I have the opportunity that within 6 months of me taking this job in 2018, I was in the governor's office saying, we all need to get together and move this waste out of the state. So I have been fully aligned with the governor's office from day one in terms of pushing this land true waste, this WIP waste out of the state of Texas. I don't want to hear, you don't want to hear, TCEQ doesn't want to hear.
And I asked this question in Commissioner's Court. It was the cask came open, things bubbled out of it at the WIP site, which there was also an incident at the Los Alamos site. And they sent things to the WIP site, but so it was safe enough to bring the cask to Andrews, but it's not safe enough to move them out?
So you're describing a challenging bureaucratic situation, not as much a safety situation. So let me start by saying the item at WIP that was deformed and actually overpressurized was a 55-gallon drum.
Sure.
So it was in a 55-gallon drum there at WIP. When the waste was shipped to us from Los Alamos for temporary storage, which was
420 truckloads.
Which was intended to be stored here because Texas decided to do a good deal for New Mexico. When that was done, it was expected to be moved out within a year. Now, the bureaucratic problem that came up was when Los Alamos dug into the reason for the problem at WIP, they determined that there was a RCRA code, Resource Conservation Recovery Act code, that needed to be applied to it. And once that code was applied, then the package that it came to us in was no longer authorized for transportation of that code. Now, that doesn't mean that it couldn't physically to go that way. In fact, I would think that'd be a great way for it to physically code. But that package didn't have authorization for that record code.
And that was, that occurred after the materials, the 420 truckloads, had already been moved to Andrews.
Yes, ma'am.
That's a little strange, isn't it? That they would change the regulations on what it could be moved in after it had already been moved, rather than before.
So I probably misspoke. So there was no change in the regulation of what it could be moved in. What changed was the designation on the waste. So when it came to us, it did not have a RECRA D001 code, but once Los Alamos did their investigations, that's when the D001 code was assigned to it. So the same package that brought it to us, nothing changed about that, but that package couldn't accept the D001 code. Again, that's what puts us in this strange bureaucratic space, even though we would all be comfortable perhaps shipping that out in the same package it came in.
Thank you so much.
Ms. Fisher, I thought I could add a little bit to answer your question as well. Part of the delay and part of the timing where the several hundred containers were shipped from Los Alamos to TCQ, or to Central Specialists, the delay there was simply the time that it took the Department of Energy, the officials at the WIP, to safely enter and get down to the point that the waste impact of the release had occurred, and to actually see and confirm. The initial suspicions at something happened, we're not sure, we shut it down and we're going to investigate. The most likely scenario at that point was a sealing failure. Something had fallen in and dipped in a drum, damaged it, caused a release. When they in fact saw, no, something released from a drum, everything stopped. And I forget what other shipment campaign still remained beyond, but it was halted at that point.
So rather than take the waste from Idaho to the Los Alamos site and leave it there, the waste from Idaho went to Los Alamos and then went to WIP and then came to Andrews. So we have, on those 420 truckloads, Idaho waste, Los Alamos waste, WIP waste, and it all came to Andrews. Why couldn't some of the Idaho waste have stayed in Los Alamos?
That's my question. Thank
So
you.
the short answer to the question is they were concerned about the forest fires.
It was Los Alamos waste. It was all
It had all originated in Los Alamos.
Yes, I knew it originated in Los Alamos. So,
Timothy Ganley here. So Mr. Carlson, one of the licenses I noticed that wasn't mentioned on your slideshow was the Consolidated Interim Storage Facility license that had been issued to you and your partner, Ron Orderman. And my assumption is probably because that was repealed by the Circuit Court of Appeals, or the Circuit Court. So is that why that wasn't listed on there, because that license has been revoked?
Yeah, so I think you know House Bill 7 was passed, not this past legislative session, but the previous one. House Bill 7 prohibits storage of spent nuclear fuel in the state of Texas, other than at nuclear power plants and at research reactors and other facilities like that. And so that license simply can't be used. At this point, the Fifth Circuit has overturned that license, and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is appealing that. Now, I want to clear up something that's been talked about here in the room quite a bit, and that's the statement that somehow WCS was trying to pull a fast one in the community relative to spent nuclear fuel. If I went back through the timeline, and if you went back through the timeline, you would find that the state of Texas, in fact, the former governor and the TCEQ, was looking for solutions after Barack Obama had shut down Yucca Mountain as an option. So they evaluated that and decided, based on some things they'd read in Blue Ribbon Commission reports and so on, that it could be a good option for Texas to have a consolidated interim storage facility. So that was the first indicator to WCS that perhaps this was something that could and should be done. Now, let me reiterate, there's a law in the state of Texas, and we have no plans to move forward with anything. But I want to take away this stigma of, you tried to mislead this community. No, that's not the case. In this very hall here, several years ago, that was probably 2014 or so, there was a meeting of the community where many people were here. Some of the people in the room today were in that room back then, when we talked about it. And what we said at that time was, okay, Ken Hance back in the paper, probably back in the early 2000s, said all we would ever take at this site was low-level radioactive waste. So we said, we're going to go out to the community and ask you all, now that the state has decided that perhaps this is an important thing to get done, we're going to ask the community, what do you all think? And the answer came back almost unanimously that, yeah, we think that's probably a good idea. In fact, the county commission at that time passed a unanimous resolution that said, okay, yeah, you should go ahead with that. We approve you going ahead with that. So based on what the state said, based on what the community said, based on what the county commissioner said, we invested tens of millions of dollars to proceed down that pathway.
Yes, sir.
We were not bad actors at that point. So what's happened since then? Well, the politics have changed. Fair enough. I understand that. The governor is opposed to that. There's a bill, House Bill 7, that says that we can't do that.
Yes, sir.
That's what we have to live with, and that's the risk we took when we went down that path. But to be abused for the fact that we were simply working with the public, that we were listening to the public, and now we're listening to the public because there's a law, House Bill 7, that says that can't happen.
So after the county commissioners passed a resolution in opposition and the state law was passed, virtually nobody in our state or community wanted this. Did you reach out to the NRC or try to cancel your license because it was issued after all that happened?
That's a great question, and I appreciate you asking.
Well, the other question I had is,
Did I answer your question?
It sounded like you did, Go ahead, I'm sorry.
So no, we didn't, and I'll tell you why. Because if we withdrew that license, what we would hear from some people, even in this room, is that you withdrew your license because you followed an illegal process. Or you would hear from people in this room, perhaps, that you withdrew your license because your site was no good. None of those things are true. So no, we didn't withdraw the license. We didn't want to be subjected to that kind of statement.
You could have educated the community that it was done, out of good faith because you wanted those to residents of our community in our state. But my ultimate question is, Amendment 22 of your low-level radioactive waste license actually merged your treatment and storage license. So if the CISP license is reinstated, is there any opportunity to amend the current low-level radioactive waste license to include some of the aspects of the CISP license?
I think you're talking completely different things from a regulatory perspective. So the Consolidated Interim Storage Facility License was granted by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission because they're the only group that has authority to grant that. That's entirely separate from the low-level radioactive waste license. So no, there is no opportunity for anything in the Consolidated Interim Storage Facility license to be somehow incorporated into a low-level waste license.
Okay.
Anything that's high-level waste is high-level waste. Anything that's low-level waste is low-level.
I appreciate that commitment to our community. Thank you.
Hello, Adrian here in front of the camera. Just had a couple of questions when the commissioner was talking about the donut hole. And I'm wondering who's going to figure that one out and how can we in the community be a part of that? Is this going to be the only meeting on that diagram with the public is involved? As far as this mess that we're in with all this material from wherever it's come, I'm not sure on the details like you guys, but it seems like we're in a mess and we're going to figure it out. And I think in the meantime, some stronger safety is going to be needed for some leaking caskets or whatever, where there has to be a process where you can replace them. They probably already have a way to replace them. They were so often, so many years or months, there have deterioration, like that dirt on top. I'm sure it can cause some deterioration on metal or concrete. And how many more engagement meetings will we have, Commissioner, in this rulemaking process? And 2025 is not that far away, if you ask me. So I was just curious on that. And then the last one was the unanswered question by, I think her name is Monica. As to what happens if there's an accident, and then we are maybe the police or the first responders. So on that, maybe we can, as a CEP, make that the next topic for more clarification, because it seems to be a pretty big issue, if you ask me. We're concerned for Andrews, but so maybe we do that. There you go.
Thank you for all those, and I would love to talk about our emergency response plan. Hope it never has to be activated, but it's occasionally activated because we do have wildfires out there, particularly on our neighbor's property, and we have firefighting equipment, so we do get out there. So that's probably the only time. Sorry about that. So probably the only time we've activated that, and it's good practice, is for range fires that happen out there quite a bit.
I'm Pam Fisher again. This is a segue from the question about safety. It's my understanding that the testing of employees for exposure to any radioactive waste or any radioactive particles is no longer required by TCEQ. Is that correct, that the testing of employees for exposure?
I can say categorically that every employee that's exposed to radiation wears dosimetry to detect radiation, goes through a bioasset monitoring program, so everyone is carefully monitored in those programs.
Is that a licensing requirement?
I want to join you. You made it conditional, that's exposed. Once upon a time, they were all tested regularly every month, and then TCQ removed that and left it to your discretion. Is that now a policy? And if it isn't, would you be willing to do that, to test your employees monthly to make sure that they haven't been unknowingly exposed?
I think we're having a miscommunication, because everyone who is in any area that would ever be exposed to radiation is absolutely monitored, and it's monitored continuously. So the only people that wouldn't be subject to that are people that would be outside the site boundaries of the permitted areas that would never be exposed to radiation.
I appreciate that, thank you.
So you do have employees exposed to radiation at your site? I thought there was no radiation in the air or anywhere at the site.
Yes, ma'am, we do have employees exposed to radiation, and I would love to talk about radiation. I can talk about it for an hour here, just between the things that you're normally exposed to in your day-to-day life and the things that we can be exposed to on the site. For a normal radiation worker, there's a federal limit for how much radiation you can be exposed to, and our workers are exposed to far less than what's in the federal limit. The federal limits are set very conservatively in terms of radiation. So we monitor our employees carefully, and we come in far below the federal limits in terms of exposure to radiation. Now, why are they exposed to radiation? Well, some of the radiation that we have is something called a gamma ray. It's very similar to an X-ray, and it can penetrate to some extent through materials that are used to package it. So they're exposed to very low levels of that, extremely low levels of that, because the packaging is there to protect them. And that's what keeps those limits far below federal limits.
Okay. Thank you.
If we could, in the interest of time, if there's a couple more, two more questions, and we'll keep moving.
I have a couple of questions. Joey Wallace. Could you explain, I think there seems to be some confusion maybe between the 55-gallon drum or whatever size drum it was that exploded and the cast that you guys use at the site. So when we're talking about the decay of the cask and the exploding cask, there seems to be a little bit of a confusion as to what you guys actually use and what maybe, what other kind of things have been used.
Right, I'd love to. So the material that was equipped was in a 55-gallon drum. Now, on our site, when we received that material, before that had happened, or before they understood what had happened there, that was in both a 55-gallon drum, but the 55-gallon drums were in something called a standard waste box, which is a robust steel container that contains 4 55-gallon drums. Those standard waste boxes were put in something called a True Pack, which is a NRC licensed cask that can hold 2 standard waste boxes. So when it got to our site, we unpacked them from those standard waste boxes. And then when we learned that there was an issue at the waste isolation pilot plant, we took those standard waste boxes. Again, this is double packed in steel. And we took those standard waste boxes and put them in our modular concrete containers as another level of containment. So that was, 3 levels of containment with really no opportunity for any kind of release on the site.
So you don't just have a bunch of 55-gallon containers sitting out there buried in dirt?
No.
So that, and then the other is, we've been led to believe that the greater than Class C is high-level waste, and on your slide it shows that it falls into the low-level waste category. And so we've been led to believe that you guys, in asking to accept the GTCC, you're asking to accept high-level waste and bring it to our community. So is that a misnomer? Are we being misled on that?
Yeah, so there's several questions and answers in that. So the first one I guess I would take on is, really relates to, is GTCC low-level radioactive waste? And the answer is absolutely yes. It is the same radionuclides that are low-level radioactive waste. In fact, I can describe the difference for you between what makes low-level radioactive waste Class C, for example, and GTCC. And in general, when you look at the tables, and anybody who's got a pencil, write this down, 10 CFR 61.55, Table 1 and Table 2 are the things that define what is Class A, B, and C radioactive waste, what is GTCC low-level radioactive waste. Now, the interesting thing in those tables, we talk about carries, and more carries, indicates more of something. That's not exactly the case. So, for example, you go to those tables and you look at cobalt-60, which is a radionuclide with a 5-year half-life. Cobalt-60, there is no limit. Everything is Class B waste at the most for cobalt-60 because it has a 5-year half-life. That means it's basically gone in 10 times its half-life. It's gone in 50 years. So another radionuclide that we see that's in Table 1 is nickel-63. And that's typically the driver of what is GTCC low-level radioactive waste. So nickel-63, the difference there is it has a 100-year half-life. So it takes about 1,000 years for all of that to go away. So is nickel-63 a really scary thing? Well, no, it's not. So nickel-63, for example, has a very weak beta emission, which means the radiation from it can travel about 2 inches in the air. Or if I had a sheet of paper, I could block the emissions from nickel-63, it couldn't get to me. So it's a very, very weak radionuclide. Imagine that buried 30 feet or more underground. That's not getting to the surface. And again, it decays away in 1,000 years, so you're not gonna have it. But that's what drove GTCC. Commissioner Janeka put tables up there that said original designs for low-level radioactive waste facility were 100 years for Class A, were 500 years for Class B. Those are ridiculous numbers to us because our design is for 10,000 years, but we've run our performance assessment out that shows safety out to 1,000,000 years. Well, most of the radionuclides are gone.
So is any of this GTCC disposed of in salt caverns? Like the way we dispose of, is any of the norm considered that, or any,
Yeah, so NORM relates more closely to what Commissioner Janeka talked about. He talked about decay of uranium to radium-226. So what NORM is about is that the natural uranium in the environment that you're going to find downhole, and that we tend to collect in filters or tank bottoms or on the interior of a pipe, that's radium-226. So that's a more long-lived radionuclide that's got a half-life beyond 1,000 years. And that's why NORM waste is of concern, because it's got a half-life past 1,000 years. Now, in terms of disposal into salt caverns, the only really robust salt cavern disposal facility in the country is the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant. And no, that material can't go to that facility. Or in general, can't go to that facility. I think it was evaluated by the DOE as an option at one point, but no, it's not always.
So is the normal, like, that type of disposal that we have around us right now, is it as regulated, like the oil field disposal that we have around us right now? In all kinds of industries, is it as regulated as what you guys are? It's the Railroad Commission, but are they as regulated? Do they have to answer all the questions and like you guys do? I mean, do they have all this oversight? I just wonder, are there wells all around their sites to make sure that what they dispose of doesn't get into the water tables and things like that? I'm just kind of wondering.
It's a different regulatory regime, and I don't believe I don't believe the Railroad Commission requires monitoring wells and those kinds of things. So I could be incorrect, and the TCEQ folks might know better, but I am not aware of any monitoring wells for the disposal that they do. I believe they inject underground.
But that's safer?
You'd have to ask the TCEQ that.
Just wondering.
Hello, my name is Elizabeth Padilla, and I have a question. How is Atlanta waste being monitored currently? Do you have some sort of heat sensors on the ACCs, or how does that work?
Yeah, so for the first several years, we had thermocouples on that waste. Over time, those thermocouples got old and they're no longer operational. But we do have all the data that we collected from several years of using thermocouples on that waste, and we saw no temperature excursions on the waste. So the goal was to make sure there wasn't a temperature excursion, to make sure that there wasn't any kind of reaction that happened. We did monitor to make sure that no reaction never happened. And what we're told by the scientific experts, that as time goes on, the likelihood of any reaction goes less and less and less and less.
Do you have any updated reports on that are made available to the public?
I think there's a number of reports that have been issued by Los Alamos National Laboratory. Maybe TCEQ would be aware if those are
because we need to know what the report on that is, definitely.
The Department of Energy, I'm not aware of what they've actually publicly released, but they have studied, different labs around the country have studied that waste. And surrogates, they did similar studies. And they have told us that they are confident that, this is the scientists we've been working with, that one of them, it literally told me that if you leave a battery in the garage too long, it eventually peters out. So any risk there was probably that first summer when they shipped the waste, if there was any at all. And then those thermocouples, Mr. Carlson mentioned, TCEQ monitored those. We saw no activity, meaning there weren't like spikes where something could have happened. So that was for many years. So, but there are studies that the DOE has done. I'd have to check to see what's publicly available. I'm not sure what they make, but we can check on
I would appreciate if you do anything to keep that public. As a concerned citizen, I would really want to know what the update on that is. Thank you.
And so just so people don't get a, idea that maybe this amount of Los Alamos waste is vast today, it's basically 258 55-gallon drums. So, I think we can picture that kind of quantity. That's what's remained to be shipped off-site. And like I said, it's our goal to get it shipped off-site as soon as possible. It's TCEQ's goal to get it shipped off-site as soon as possible, and the governor's office as well.
Mayor Flora Brawley, I just, you stated that you yourselves want that out of there, the web. You want it out of there. So 10 years, is that TCEQ or is that NRC? They've had 10 years. Get it out of here.
Thank you, Mayor, and I think you've reiterated the opinions of all of us. It's been DOE stumbling around, trying to get, and that's not fair, it's been DOE studying this material to try to get the pathway for a package that can move it out.
We've extended 10 years of courtesy. Whoever's over there, they need to work harder. 10 years is enough.
Thank you, Dave, appreciate it. We need to talk about setting a date and time for our next CEP meeting. It'll be sometime in the middle of April. We can nail a time down. Most importantly, we need to get a topic. Well, we've got a group here. I'd like to know, Adrian brought up some topics. Is there any other, we have a community build full of people. What would people like these topics to be at this next CEP meeting? Anybody here? Please. Please, you have to come here. Folks can stand in front of the camera, of course, those issues. So.
The one thing that I would just like to see as a topic is whenever.
Would you please come front, please? Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
The one thing that I would like to see on the next agenda or the next meeting as a topic of discussion would be, right now we've been storing some of the materials and the term storage was used frequently. But meaning storage as temporary is supposed to go away. But what happens in the event that there's a change and it turns into a permanent facility, or it turns into an actual portion of the disposal site? It was just a question that I wrote down earlier, and because y'all were going to want more topics for next time. But I think that would be an important one to know. What happens if it turns into from temporary to permanent in the future as things change, as amendments are made, or anything thereof?
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Anybody else? Or making this too easy?
You said a date?
Pardon?
What date?
We'll set a date, and we'll put it out. It'll be sometime in first, second week of April, probably, Adrian. But we'll get a date and time lined out. Once we get our topics decided, and I'll ask the panel if you'll please consider doing adjourn to meet up here, and we'll discuss this a little further. We'll get a plan on where we want to move. We have to make sure that we get all of our business lined out in that aspect. And I'd like to take a minute to thank Commissioner and Cam and Ashley. Thank you guys for coming from the TEC. We appreciate y'all having traveled from Austin, and thank you so much for your time and your interest in our community. And we'll probably be reaching out to get some more education, but it's good to hear from y'all. We hope that y'all are helping to do what you can. And thank you for taking the time to listen to what we have to say. We appreciate it. All right. Yeah?
Are you just?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Well, I didn't want to, I have one thing to say. I didn't get a chance, so.
Yeah, please. And then, like I said, we can get her in a couple of hours, and we're going to let this lady have her say. And we will get on the move.
Oh, you got it.
Out of here, please.
Thanks. I'll hand you the mic. I want to make a quick plug for everybody. Next Tuesday, please come on. Next Tuesday, the NRC is having a public meeting. Adrian's question: Where can y'all public meeting? It'll be after 2025 before TCEQ is going to have any public meetings ungraded in Class C. I think. Never say never, but we're not supposed to have meetings when we're not authorized to do something on it. But next Tuesday afternoon, the NRC is holding a meeting, and I will get a copy the link to Bob so he can distribute it to anybody who wants to attend virtually.
Okay. Now, there's the animosity or what you might think is animosity is, it goes back to the very beginning, back in the 80s when James Roberts and Ken Hance and the others were developing this thing. Back in the day, and then when it was done, the promise was made in the paperwork that we would never have anything but A, B, and C. And so that's where all of this, any of the people that are concerned, that is where the concern comes from, is that we were told when James Roberts and his compadres, when they started meeting and when they started talking to people and they got all these people together, the biggest thing was that the only way, because we voted on it, so the only way that they could get that done was that it was only low-level A, B, and C. Now, I don't know if GTCC was around back then, but it wasn't on the list. So I've lived here 43 years. My husband grew up here and went to school here. You know, we raised all our kids here. So we've got a vested interest in this community. And we know, you know, you go to Eunice, you go to Hobbs, you go right by this. This is, I mean, there's lots of places that it could have been put that had miles and miles, hundreds of miles between one place and the other. If you look at out there by the Guadalupe Peak area, I mean, you can see it seems like forever. But that's where the fear comes from. That's where the distrust comes from. That's where the questions come from. Because we were told, it was put in writing in an election, that this is what we would have. So to change it is going to take, you know, I mean, I see that if you want, there's extra money. I get all of that stuff. Makes perfect sense to me. But you're fighting a promise that was made to the people of this community. And there's going to be some people that are, oh, hey, it's okay. But I'll bet you they're not people that are staying here. And we love you guys. I mean, WCS has been here, they started doing this, right? We moved here in 80. So all this was I was cleaning the news office at that time when I was going to school and a bunch of other houses in town. That's how I made grocery money and stuff. But we've known it since the beginning. And we appreciate everything WCS has done. Absolutely. But getting a greater class of waste isn't part of that appreciation. So, and agreeing to it is not something that I feel that most people who have educated themselves, the more educated the community gets, the less likely I feel that GTCC or even temporary storage of something is going to be acceptable. And, you know, we've been through this before. And anyway, that's all I got to say. It's just all the things that WCS have done has not gone unnoticed at all.
Thank you, Ms. Weaver.
Okay.
Can I respond to just a piece of that?
What did I get wrong? Oh, I'm bringing it to you.
Please, there's too much, we're gonna let James part of this, and then we're gonna shut her down.
Face the camera, if you want to.
You gotta fall down.
Sorry, I'd rather be facing all you, but that's what I'm told. So I talked about the high-level waste and how we got to where we got to with that, and how we got apart from that because the politics changed and we are going to obey the laws of the state of Texas. I've heard it said over and over again that when Ken Hans made a promise, he made a promise, this will only be Class A, B, and C waste. Well, that's not what he said. He said low-level radioactive waste. Well, why don't we have GTCC in our license today then? Well, the reason why we don't have GTCC in our license is because it's in rulemaking in Texas. And so when we applied for a license, we could not apply to take GTCC, even though that is low-level radioactive waste, even though the site, and again, I can't place the camera there anymore, even though the site is incredibly protected and is certainly protected enough for GTCC waste, some of which we all feel comfortable running down the road in a wireline truck. That's safe, right? I believe that's safe, absolutely. Stored on our site, that's safe. We've had GTCC waste stored on our site for about 20 years. I believe that's safe, absolutely. And finally, put into disposal in the most robust facility that's ever existed in the country. I believe that absolutely as well. Now, we have not applied for disposal of GTCC waste. We, back in 2014, submitted a petition for rulemaking to clarify the regulations in the state of Texas. That's still an ongoing process. So we have not applied for anything at this point. But again, the promise from Ken Hans, or at least everything I can find in the record, is low-level radioactive waste is what we promised to take. And the reason why GTCC is not in our license is because it simply wasn't in Texas regulation to allow that. Thank you.
Thank you guys for your time. This is the purpose of this, to give people a chance to talk. If you've got some questions, get them lined out. We have the website for the video engagement battle on Facebook. Just look it up on Facebook. We will put it out on Facebook. We'll put it in the paper. We'll do everything we can to educate everybody on the next meeting, what the topic is. And thank you guys so much for your interest in this community. Back to TDCQ, thank y'all so much. And panel members, come by, we'll be right up here a little bit for a minute. Thank you guys, and have a good evening. Be safe going home.